I am so excited to see this movie.
Strength and honor!
Yes, Gladiator 2 is almost here and it's got sharks in it. But how can there possibly be sharks at a gladiatorial games in the Colosseum? Also, who is this guy? Who are these guys? And why is this guy surfing a rhinoceros? To find out, I asked Professor Alison Futrell, a professor of Roman history at the University of Arizona, for her unvarnished take. And it starts now.
It is an art, choosing gladiators. They're usually prisoners of war.
So I really like to see here definite callbacks to the first film. The overall view of the sort of practice amphitheater, the guy coming in to talk about choosing gladiators, the sort of institution of the gladiators as a trade, as a money-making business. It reminds us, of course, of the first film, but also reminds us of the way that Maximus was tricked into becoming a gladiator.
Now, how Lucius goes from being the nephew of Emperor Commodus to fighting against the power of Rome in this battle scene, featuring Pedro Pascal's General Cassius, is entirely unclear, but it's presumably here that he gets taken prisoner and whisked off to Gladiator camp. Now, the guy that Alison mentioned just there is the proxima of the piece, Denzel Washington's Macrinus. He's the one responsible for thrusting Paul Mescal's Gladiator into the arena and into a shouting match with a baboon. But you may be surprised to know that unlike Proximo, Macrinus is a real and historical Roman.
I'm so excited to see Denzel Washington as Macrinus, who is from Mauritania in the sources. It comes from Caesarea. And it's important, too, to see these people and the connection to North Africa, because this is a time when there are a lot of North Africans holding very prominent positions of power, including the deceased father of these two young emperors we see in this movie. Septimius Severus came from North Africa himself.
The two emperors we just saw are Caracalla and Geta, who came to power as co-emperors in February AD 211, though they had both previously ruled as junior emperors under their father.
What's kind of striking visually about these two is their pale faces, their oddly colored hair that looks to be the result of a bad dye job, and the fact that they don't really seem to be retaining any indication of their own racial and ethnic heritage. Their father comes from North Africa, their mother comes from Syria. The sort of mixed race aspect of Caracalla is something that's actually commented about by some of our sources. Now, the sources don't like Caracalla, so they say he shows the worst aspects of each of these people. From reading the ancient sources, we have the impression that as teenagers, Caracalla and Geta are kind of off the wall in their behavior, kind of running amok, indulging their pleasures and their passions in adolescent kind of ways, certainly. And there's a lot of tension between the two, which we're not really seeing that much of in the trailer.
By all accounts, there was no love lost between the two. At one point, they considered dividing the Roman Empire along the Bosphorus, simply because they didn't get along. Now, had they done that, and this is a small spoiler for real history, and we don't know if it's going to influence the film at all, it might have saved Geta's life. Here's Alison again to explain why.
As some people may know, Geta doesn't survive an entire year after the death of his father. Before the end of the year, 211, Geta is dead, having been murdered by his brother, Caracalla. While their mother was present, as Geta was clinging to her skirts and screaming for help and calling upon the woman who bore him, she's unable to fend off her older son. And she herself is actually wounded in the effort of trying to do so. She's covered in blood, apparently. And in the wake of that, she's forced to pretend to be happy. She's not able to grieve her younger son because of the overwhelming authority and insistence of her surviving, now single emperor.
Clearly, he had a loss of power from a young age. Here he is depicted after being caught attempting to poison his own father.
It will clear my path to the throne. You will be my instrument.
I will never be your instrument in this life or the next.
That's a familiar phrase from Gladiator 1, isn't it? If you've been wondering whether the shadow of Maximus was going to loom large over Gladiator 2, well, this is the precursor to a massive truth bomb.
Lucius, take your father's strength. His name was Maximus, and I see him in you.
There is that allegation that's actually spoken aloud in this trailer that was hinted at to some extent, I think, in the first film. The idea that Lucilla and Maximus have had a very close, intimate relationship years before, and the strong connection that Maximus finds himself forging with little Lucius at that point. I'm interested, too, in how they have Lucius picking up the dirt from the sands of the arena, mindful now of the paternity that he has been introduced to. Who is this Lucius historically? Lucilla herself, of course, is dead before the events of the first film, the historical Lucilla. And she has a couple of sons, one by her first husband, Lucius Verus, who's co-emperor with Marcus Aurelius, of course. But she has a second son as well by her second husband. And it's this second son who actually survives into potentially the time period that we're talking about.
Now, Lucius is very clearly our hero, leading or at least taking part in this rebellion against the power of Rome. But who is our villain? You might think, obviously, it's these guys, our pair of mercurial, murderous emperors. But you also need to watch out for this guy.
I have the trust of the emperors. It will clear my path to the throne. To restore order, I must have power.
Was Macrinus a conniver? Well, in the end, he was. He starts out as someone who's working in the imperial household, someone who doesn't have an elite background at all, who works his way up to important and useful positions, to procurator and eventually to praetorian prefect. And that's the key. The Praetorian Guard is so powerful in politics at this time. Supposedly, there's this prophecy about him, some sort of horoscope that he's been given, that both he and his son will hold imperial power. And so he's aware of that. Mind you, at the end, Macrinus is conspiring to get rid of Caracalla. Caracalla is completely off the wall by this point and is ruining the empire. He's not the only one who's conspiring, and he's not personally, holding the knife or anything like that. He's positioning himself to hold power, but he's not as sinister as might be coming across in this trailer.
That being said, and again this is a spoiler for real history, Caracalla does come to a sticky end, stabbed by one of his own soldiers in modern-day Turkey whilst he's relieving himself. And you'll never guess who becomes emperor after Caracalla. Yep, it's this guy.
This is war! Real war!
We need to talk about this incredible moment, the Naumachia, this great naval battle. Now, you may have guessed from the fact I gave it a proper name, Naumachia. This is real, sort of. Here's Alison to explain.
We know of particular examples where they reenact great naval battles of the past in a number of different locations. Julius Caesar does it, Augustus does it, and they have fairly substantial places where they perform this. Places that, in terms of, overall performance space, approach the size of the Circus Maximus, which is, of course, the largest spectacle venue that the Romans have. Now, were they doing this in the Colosseum? The question I've always had about the Colosseum is in terms of size, because it's just not that big of a performance space. It's like, maybe 85 meters by 55 meters, which is relatively small when you're trying to bring in ships that are manned by rowers and so forth.
Something we skipped over there that we really should talk about is there are sharks in the water. Surely they didn't have those.
There's no record. No Sharknado in ancient Rome. Roman scholars knew about terrifying monsters of the deep, and they described them. Some of them are whales, and they don't really see whales that often in the Mediterranean. Orca are definitely in the Mediterranean. There are others that they just refer to as monsters. And they do talk about sharks as well. Though I haven't encountered anyone talking about the possibility of corralling these and moving them to Roman performance spaces at all.
As with the sharks, this rhinoceros is a bit iffy. Wild animal hunts were staged between man and beast in the Colosseum, and sometimes these did involve rhinoceroses. But there's no evidence in the sources for gladiators mounting them or riding them into the arena. So that's some of the real history behind Gladiator 2. Over to Alison for some final thoughts.
I really enjoyed it a lot. The music, the visual, the sinister depths, and the excess of luxury, and the sharks, and the baboons. I want to see more.
If you want to know more about Gladiator 2 and the real history behind it, head over to historyextra.com. And of course, like and subscribe to this channel if you want more historical content from us.